So, hello everybody. Nice to meet you and see you at this online lecture that we organized in University of Latvia Business Incubator together with John, who is our mentor, colleague, and also we have worked on hackathon together, and we are together working on his initiative 331040, what he will probably explain you a little bit later on. And now, John, the floor is yours. Take us away.
Okay, so thank you for that. And yeah, we're going to get to 3331040 actually really quickly. So everyone can see my screen display of the PowerPoint presentation. Lena, if you can confirm, I had given you some hours ago a copy of the presentation. You're going to make it available for anyone that wants to be able to access it or download it later on?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay. So anyone that is interested for the presentation, Lena will get you the link, and you're welcome to have a copy of the presentation. So of course, my name is John Andrews. I'll be introducing myself a little bit more here in just a second. The title of the presentation that I came up with, so Lena had shown me relative to the business incubator, and for the current projects and such that are going through incubator, she kind of showed me the list of topics that have been gone through as people have gone through these months. And so I think it took me within a few minutes of when I saw your list of topics, I thought, okay, I think I know the topic I want to do. So what I had come up with is the complete business model, bringing it all together from ideation to profitability. So that's kind of the nice, short, sweet topic that a person that's good at branding and marketing would have. I don't tell people I'm particularly great at branding and marketing. So I tend to say way too much. People who have met me would know that I can tend to say too much. So I think there's a couple of sub topics as well. So it's also kind of like everything, everywhere, all at once, as in like that movie that won all the Oscars here a year or so ago. But also known as do not make the stay on one station mistake. And we're going to get to both of those things in just a few minutes here. Let's see if I can get my navigation going. So in terms of our flow, my understanding is that we have up until 8 o'clock if we want to go that long. The presentation, I was going to basically start with the presentation. I think it will take maybe about an hour, but my thinking was to try to get through it fairly quickly and efficiently. I have a fair number of slides. Some of them are going to be very quick, some are going to be longer. But even on some of the ones that have a little bit more complex information in them, I think what we could do is we can try to get through the presentation, and then I think it's going to be more enjoyable to try to have an interactive discussion. So at least to have 30 minutes for the discussion. So our basic structure is we're going to start with the presentation, then we're going to do the discussion, and then we're going to get through a lot of topics as we go. So I'm going to start with the presentation. And the presentation, we're going to start with the preamble. So it goes a little bit like this. So, okay, guys, I'm about to start the presentation flow with my finish, since often it is a good way to start a start. I will finish this presentation flow with my finish, of course. Between my start finish, which is not to be confused with the language finish, and my finish, I'll do all that is in between, obviously. The in between and the start that also is my finish all connect. I mean, come on, does it make sense otherwise? And this is the moment where if we were in a group session, I would say that you're all supposed to say essentially, and you have to think about this a little bit, you have to say no, so yes, that logic makes perfect sense, sort of. So I'm gonna start with the finish with the finish, do the in-between. And then a base assumption for the group that we have today. It's a good base assumption. About you first as an audience, and then the discussion's participants. I've made the base assumption that each of you possesses three qualities, and I'm sure you basically do. You're smart, you're motivated, and you're a risk taker. So if you think about this combination, and I think about, these three items. If you say, for example, I'm smart and I'm motivated, I don't know if I'm so much of a risk taker. As we go through the presentation, maybe we'll turn you into more of a risk taker. If you say, okay, I'm smart and I'm a risk taker, by the time we're done, hopefully we're going to make you a little bit more motivated. If you say I'm motivated and I'm a risk taker, but maybe I don't know if I'm so smart, we'll make you more smart by the time we finish the presentation. If you say I'm just smart, I think we can make you more motivated and a risk taker by the end of the presentation. If you say I'm just mostly motivated, I think we can make you more smart and more risk taker by the end of the presentation. If you say that you are only kind of like just a crazy risk taker, I would say maybe you don't fit for this environment because that's a little bit too much. So now to start with the finish, I'm going to talk about an online platform. So this is going to be a little bit about myself. So why I am here, you may wonder. Starting with my background, I'm originally from the United States. I think there's a fair number of people that are on the session that I've met in one way or another before, and so you would already know some of this. So I'm originally from the United States. I actually came to Europe and started living in Sweden a long time ago. So I've been living in Sweden since the late 1990s, and then I have been connected to Latvia since the early 2000s. So when I talk about the situation in Latvia, I use the word we, because my wife is from Latvia. We have our three sons that are Latvian citizens. I've been going to Latvia and interacting with things in Latvia for more than 2 decades. I think I understand Latvia actually fairly well. And so those three connections. Most of my career background is in management consulting. So I was with the firm EY. I started long ago. I started in the mid 1980s, and I actually left EY actually in the mid 2000s. But I did this full cycle of starting as a staff consultant. I finished as a partner and a vice president, and I was actually at the time leading our second largest account in the world in my final years that I was with the company. So over that period of time, I would say I had about 40 different clients. I mostly worked in the high technology industry, and you'll hear more about that, I think, as we get into the discussion and such. I've done work in one way or another and led things in about 30 different countries. Probably over all the years, I've been involved with planning, running, or overseeing, I would say something on the order of around 200 different types of initiatives, some of them extremely large, involving tens of millions of euros, involving thousands of people, things like this, some of them quite small. And then I won't get greatly into this, so I left consulting in the mid 2000s. I wanted to do something a little bit more ambitious. I worked on things in connection with the University of Chicago. They have something called their Computation Institute. And there's aspects of the Internet Protocol Suite that we all use that don't work particularly well. So I had these years dealing with features of the Internet Protocol Suite. So you could say I'm kind of a big challenge junkie. Latvia's early stage commercial innovation community is underserved. I'm going to talk about that. I believe it's underserved. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. And so this is my latest challenge fixation. And for those people who've already been meeting me in regards to this, I think you will definitely say that you would agree when I say that I like my latest fixation a lot. So it's been really fun and exciting. The thing that I'm working with that, for example, Lena's kind of connected to our core team as well, is the initiative's called 3331040. It's for addressing Latvia. The name of the initiative is the goal, and it's because what I in particular see is that this space needs, the early stage innovation community in Latvia needs kind of more intensely focused efforts on achieving quality outcomes. They're going to give stronger commercial enterprises, and we're going to get into some of this in a few minutes here, that are emerging out of Latvia's early stage development space. So what 333-1040 stands for, I'm not going to go through it in detail now because it's not really the focus of this presentation, but it's this idea that you could have 3 Riga, Latvia headquartered intensely commercial enterprises, each of them having 3 billion euros in multinational revenues, with a 3 billion in listed equity market capitalization, that they're driving very large value chain workforces of about 10,000 each. And this could be achieved by 2040. So basically 16 years from now, which is to say it's a fantastically aggressive time horizon. And so that's what 333-1040 is about. If we want to, when we get into discussion, I can come back to this and speak about it more. To give you the headline of what we're going to do, so we're going to create a new online collaborative platform. It's going to function as a marketplace that's going to serve the community that all of you are a part of. So it's going to be for Latvia's early stage commercial innovation community. Through the platform, we're going to offer more comprehensive Think Complete business model, the topic of this discussion today, support to early stage ventures. This includes better tools, more consistent mentoring and advising, improved performance management, innovative rewards, including share ownership, and access to more and longer lasting financing. One thing that's not in here is we have the idea of trying to collaborate and cooperate with everything that's in the space around us. So like when you look at like the business incubator, it's to work with all these organizations and always say we're all about openness and sharing and cooperation. And the space, there's no reason to think competitively in this particular space when you look at the current circumstance that I'm going to get into in a minute. In terms of our, I'm going to get into something in a few minutes here about how I am like addicted to, you must be very disciplined in planning. So our path from where we are to the future, we basically during 2024 have 2 development tracks that we are driving. One of them is that even though we don't have a tool yet, we're in the process of forming and extending an informal network that is supporting development initiatives. And that's what these numbers on the top of the screen indicate. The coloration on the screen indicates where our greatest focus is. And so the darker colors indicate how the focus shifts as you go through time. We have a second track, which is this online platform. Before we get to summer, we're going to do an architectural effort. I'll be talking about that more at the end of the presentation. We're then going to construct that thing. We're then going to migrate our informal community to it. And then our intention is to expand that community. So that was a very quick introduction of myself and the initiative that I'm working with in connection with the Latvian early stage commercial innovation space. And that means we're ready for, we have finished with the start, which is the finish. We're ready for the in-between. If we look at the our situation with the innovation space in Latvia, and I say our and I say we because I've been connected to Latvia for a very long time, and also the thing is, when you think about what you do, is you always want to be inclusive in your approach. So I'm always going to say we, but so this is a little bit of a complex set of numbers on it, but the size of our innovation community is not clear. However, you can estimate that we could say maybe using statistical tables from Latvia's Statistical Bureau, let's say maybe 10% of the people in the 15 to 74 age group are inclined towards pursuing entrepreneurship in some form or another. What that says is if we have a population in Latvia of 1,875,000 as of the beginning of 2022, the population that's kind of available for innovation participation is on the order of maybe 1 million, and that those that are interested in entrepreneurship is maybe 100,000, but possibly 10% of that group is highly entrepreneurial. So for example, with the people that we have on the session today, I would say you're in the category of being highly entrepreneurial, and that's a smaller number, as I would guess. But when you look at Latvia as a total population, it's still a quite large number. It's maybe on the order of 10,600 people or so. I may get into another couple slides here in a second, and you say, okay, and this is something when you're thinking about your own initiatives and you're thinking about development, always you want to be saying, what is my market? What's my addressable space? How can I best understand it? And it takes time to ever figure out whatever addressable space you're trying to get into. We're in that process with this 333-1040 initiative as well. But with these estimates, what I would say is that today, of those 10,600 people, maybe 2,100 or so are currently being addressed in some pretty decent way or degree, such as you guys through the business incubator. I would guess that closer to 8,500 are people that are highly entrepreneurial, but they don't really have a path to not being addressed. And so my belief about the early stage innovation community in Latvia is that there's a great distance to go to do more in supporting and addressing the market. If we look at our innovation ecosystem in Latvia, we already have a vibrant set of actors that are directly serving or having a close connection to our early stage innovation system. You could look at this in different ways, but one way is to say they broadly position across two dimensions. They tend to have a focus on training and supporting networking, over to a focus on enterprise establishment and creation. Then you have actors that are kind of not-for-profits and social in their organization, and you have those that are commercial. All of the positions are important, and this is not a complete list by a long shot. This tends to have a focus on what you have concentrated around Riga. So, you have out in the regions, you have other things. But if you take this basic structure, for example, we are here with the business incubator, where the incubators focus on helping to establish enterprises, and it is a type of not-for-profit type of activity. You have up on the commercial side of this enterprise development focus area, things like Startup House that got announced here about a month ago, Helva, you have the Latvian Business Angel Network, and so on. When you come over towards this commercial actor side that's more training focused, some of you maybe have encountered or been through the trainings that are provided by this company called Doctorium, which is a fantastic company with what they've developed and what they do. And you also have, for example, on the not-for-profit side, organizations like Riga Tech Girls that is led by Anna Anderson. So that's kind of a picture of the market space. Our ecosystem's challenges are pretty significant, and the next two slides I think are going to make that clear. So the Latvian State Auditors Report, they were commissioned to look into how Latvia has done in the prior 10 years with developing more new companies and innovation in the country. And the report was not particularly positive. The most important thing, and if anyone's interested, I could give you access to the report, is really well done. In 2023, Latvia ranked 25th among the 27 EU countries in the European Innovation Scorecard. And after 5 years of representing the group of moderate innovators, it actually went backwards and it slipped to the lowest group of emerging innovators. So when we look at our ecosystem and our space, and connected into my main topic of this presentation, it's kind of clear that the macro picture tells us that we need to tighten things up. There's more evidence for the macro picture telling us that we need to tighten things up. Starden.lv, once a year, they come out with their report on they call it the Latvia Startup Report. So this Latvia Startup Report for 2023 came out actually around the middle of January. And what they said is, no doubt in 2023, this Latvian startup ecosystem had it hard. Startup demographics continued to stagnate. Investment numbers were the lowest since 2020, and kind of so on. So what you have in these two graphs is that if you look at the number, and the highlighting and the commenting is actually by me, but if you look at, for example, startups registered that Starden says are kind of more substantial, not every startup that gets registered, by their assessment, we're back to where we were in the mid 2010s. If you look at funding and you look at the number of enterprises getting funding, it's decreased also since the mid 2010s. And if you consider that we have a 40 billion euro economy in Latvia, and you consider that last year, as far as Starden could tell, there was something just under 18 million euros of financing, but most of that financing only went to 2 companies. And this is actually not really startup here in 2021. This is actually Printful bringing in a very substantial private investor in the year 2021. These numbers are effectively not so large. So our ecosystem opportunity, we undoubtedly, most definitely, quite assuredly, without a question, can tighten things up, but how? So, and we have someone who's coming in the room. When you look at the program that you've gone through with the business incubator and all the different things, the structure and the topics that they brought you through, this is what Lena had shared with me as I was preparing the presentation. And it's a fantastic list of really good topics. What I highlighted in yellow is the ones that kind of capture me the most. But you're going to see that I would maybe even add on to the list in just a second. The title of my presentation is about developing the complete business model. So, things about the value proposition for the customer. The people who have met me will know that you have to be constantly working on that. It's closely connected to your market research. Making sure you have a business and a profit model is fundamentally important. Being excellent at marketing and sales is fundamentally important. Being able to present and to sell yourself in your presentation is critical as well. So those are the types of things that I take particular note of. But let's take a look at it maybe in a little bit different way. So let's think in terms of more the idea of a complete business model. This is actually the most complex slide in my presentation, and this slide is the heart of my presentation. So this here, I think we're going to be maybe coming back to once we get into the discussion. So for the remainder of the in-between part, I want to speak about this integration into a whole type of concept. There's much to address. When you're developing an enterprise, your priorities change over time. Also, the scale that you're trying to get to, it changes how much energy you have to put in, how many people you need involved, all those things. But whether you're going to develop a very small type of business or whether you're going to develop something that's going to become fairly large and it will scale substantially, you still have a common set of things that you have to cover. So what you have on the left side, oh, I need to go back. What you have on the left side here is, if you think about an enterprise's life cycle, you kind of start with ideation and inception. Possibly some of us here on the call are still in an ideation phase with what's being developed. You have a startup and launch after that. In the case of like 333-1040, we're done with ideation and we are into launch. So less likely you're on this call and you're in growth and expansion phase. Very unlikely that you're in a maturity and a stability phase. And then eventually you get into other things like most enterprises eventually do get into decline and a downturn. So my joke is if you're between these two areas, possibly in the wrong place you are. If you look on the right side, these circles and the numbers, they line up with the enterprise's life cycle. So you start at 1 with ideation. And I like these circles because the circles give you this indication of you need to have a balance. Of course, when you're getting started in your small group, you cannot actually be doing everything everywhere all at once, but you need to be always thinking comprehensively. And you need a lot of discipline about how you do that. So you need to do that when you're in the ideation phase. You need to do it even more when you're in the startup and the launch phase, and it just keeps going. And the type of thing that I like to promote is that you want to be always thinking of everything from what am I doing? How am I going to get sales? How am I going to fulfill whatever the product or service is I'm dealing with? Things like dealing with production. You need to consider things like risk management. You need to be working on leadership all the time. And then you have some things in here that a lot of people would say, okay, those don't seem to be, why do you have strategy and then have, for example, accounts receivable? Because when you're developing an enterprise and you're first getting started, and particularly in Latvia, where you have to, it's hard to get funding, as we were just seeing on those earlier slides, you have to do bootstrapping. Accounts receivable, there's a stage where accounts receivable is everything. And I'm going to have some frameworks that I'll show where a very common way to go out of business is that you actually grow out of business. And I'll get to that here in a few minutes. So everything, everywhere, all at once, you need to be thinking of this entire framework as you go through your cycle. And if you could be giving these things scores at a point in time when you're working on your effort, you would want to say, okay, maybe what we're doing is we got a huge amount of effort on development, but we're, for example, not doing anything on branding. So you wouldn't have a circle. You would have one area where you're popping out and another area where nothing's happening. And so you're not getting a complete business model to come together. So let's talk about the opposite of that circumstance. And it's the other part of my subtitle to the presentation. You do not want to make the stay on one station mistake. So this is a metaphor. So would you go to the gym and train on only one or a few machines every time you went to the gym? You definitely would not. However, what I think happens that I've seen like through the course of my whole career is you often, somehow when we're developing things, we get into this groove of doing precisely this with enterprise creation. And in particular, what we can do is we'll stay working at the stations we're good at and we know. But when you're developing an enterprise, and if you're not addressing what's in this framework, and you get into this stay on one station type of practice, it's a bad idea. What often you want to do is you don't want to solve the problem that must be solved. You might have, for example, issues around intellectual property, and you don't really have legal knowledge, or know how to deal with intellectual property. But that could be a key problem that you need to solve. But you might be a really good software developer. So what you do is you spend all your time on software development. But the thing is, you haven't addressed the intellectual property. So nearly always, I don't believe in black and white. Um, you do not want to make the stay on one station mistake. And this picture is so empty when you do it. When you get a solid business model going, and so if sometimes you're trying to start a small business and all you want is a small business, I'm kind of talking more about where you're trying to get something that is coming into a profile where it's going to scale. So I tend to focus more on things where you're trying to get a business that if you look 3 or 4 or 5 years out, you're going to have at least some millions of euros of revenue and you're going to have profitability. The things that I really like are the things that are going to have more than just some millions of revenue when you go 5 years out. They're going to have, say, 5 or 7 or 8 million euros of revenue, and they're going to have this growth profile where they can start to do what we've seen that Printful did. They were started back around 2014 or so, or you look at what Printify has done. So when you start to get your business model working, and we're going to talk about these things more in a little while, you get scalability, adjustability, enhanced security, reuse of components, economies of scale, network effects, and in one way or the other, you tend to make yourself the spider at the center of an informational web. And that's why you want to have a full business model come together. Coming into elements of the business model, I'm going to hit this very quickly, and we can double back on it in the discussion if we want to. I'm a believer that even if you're starting something quite small, you need to think in terms of strategy. And I'm also a believer that, particularly like if you go and you look at large organizations, you have a situation in the world today where there's a pressure, like on big companies, to always say that they have a strategy. So what they do is they have like a 5-year plan. It includes their forecasts of their financials. It includes their mission, vision, values, and so on. And what they do is they put on the front of that document that that's their strategy. Strategy is not that. Strategy is achieving a position of durable strength through action to capture a significant opportunity, usually by solving a small set of paramount problems. And it looks like having a laser sharp understanding of an opportunity space. There's more to it. It looks like pursuing a specific yet multifaceted goal. So 3-3-3-10-40 is not a strategy. It's just a goal. 4-3-3-3-10-40, we have 3 strategic levers that we're working on. And I can talk about that later if anyone's interested. So your goal, your numbers, that's not a strategy. When you are working strategic levers in a successful way, it tends to get you substantial revenues, long-term higher profits with strong liquidity. You're going to see that ties into the frameworks I'm going to get into in a few minutes. Really nice returns on your investment. In one way or another, even if you're talking about a smaller enterprise that is only focused on serving, say, the Riga market space or whatever, you still have somewhat of a form of a protected market position. Nearly always, you're going to have a direct ownership of the customer. And the interesting thing with strategy is that you find organizations that say, oh, we should be so secretive. We can't tell anyone our strategy. Of course, if you're putting it on a planning document that you show the world, that's not really the case, but it's also not a strategy. There's no need to have your strategy be a secret in most circumstances, because I'm going to get into this. Strategic accomplishment is achieved through the culture of an enterprise. And so when you're doing strategy well, your competitors are going to thoroughly understand it, but they're not going to be able to match it. When you really hit on strategy, you can share it with your competitors. They won't be able to match it. Another thing about strategy is on a day-to-day basis, it's completely messy on the ground. It feels like chaos. So it's a state of mind elicited through relentless behavior. And strategy is a big thing. I need to actually explain this transition. I'll go back. So I had in the header text here, then in the upcoming slides, we will visually see, we can say jump into what robust strategies tend to look like. And so now we have this flow. You're supposed to be thinking like you're crouching and you're jumping and you're flying and you're extending and you're getting younger and you're lifting and you're getting even younger and you're preparing and you land. And then hopefully at this point you smile. Because I have this thing that when you're developing something, you're supposed to have fun. You're supposed to be creative and clever. And it all comes down to this, which I'm not going to read you through. You'll get a copy of the presentation, but when you're working with strategy, in my opinion, one thing's for sure, relative to what's around you in the space, you're going to be different. So if you're doing something where you've got strategic levers and they're taking you somewhere, they're doing something for you, you are definitely going to be different. This is absolutely true in terms of the space that we address in Latvia's early stage commercial market, and that's because you don't necessarily have to be different if you have a huge amount of money and you can just go into a space and buy market share. You can be like everyone else and you can just lower prices and you can buy market share. But unless you have a tremendous amount of money and you can, and I'm talking like tens of millions of euros, hundreds of millions of euros, what have you, and you can buy market share, then you need to be different in terms of how you formulate your strategy. Strategy and being different, they go hand in hand. As we go through, I'm going to hit short innovator insights that are not listed in the table of contents. So we'll start with the first one, which is black and white do not exist, lines do not exist. When you're kind of an innovator, there's when you think of lines, there's places where you're trying to achieve a market entry where you're kind of more targeted or less targeted. The complexity of getting into that position is greater or less, but there are no lines. There's just places where it's more challenging, more difficult, places where it's easier, and there are no absolutes. As you go through and you're doing development, it's always kind of variations of color along the way. What we're going to get into is I'm going to now start to move around the framework, and I'm not doing a particularly ordered flow at this point. My presentation is actually what you would call a mashup. Mashup means that you built it from other types of materials, which is how I got this one put together. And you'll also see that all my slide backgrounds are changing and everything like that. So the first thing I thought I'd start with is, I think that when you're developing an enterprise, you're effectively always doing agile business design. It's just a question of whether you can do it better or worse. Good development essentially is always done in an agile design way. Maybe as you've done trainings in the incubator and such, you've covered some of this. There actually is no such thing as, there's no agile methodology. There's a lot of methodologies that will tell you that they are agile in their structure. So agile is actually a philosophy. Initially, people will tell you applied to software development, I would say I had experienced this in the late 1980s and early 1990s, where you saw software development, and there's no question that it was being done with agile types of practices. And then people say that it later came into full business development types of practices. So it emphasizes flexibility, collaboration, and so on. But some of the most important things about being agile is, and I'm a huge fan of this, sprints and time box development. You prioritize your means over your ends. So when you're developing things, you ask yourself, is this something that is important to getting my goal? Does it have, or is it just a tool to get me somewhere? When your tool has served you well enough, never become too wedded to a tool. Basically say it served me, I can move on. So you see things when people are doing development where they suddenly decide they have to be perfect about something. Often being perfect is something that's going to sidetrack you. It is massively iterative in the way that you do it. If you're doing it well, you should be involving your customers and getting feedback as much as you can every step of the way. It's cross-functional, it's collaboration. It involves, of course, continuous improvement. This is one that I hugely believe in. Maximizing the work that you don't do. It's extremely important to ask, when you're working on things and creating things, some things are very necessary and very important. Some things, it's where you're getting into where your means start to look like your goal, what you're trying to get to. So you do the work that is critical to getting to your goal, and then you're flexible to change. So that's basically agile business design. The next innovator insight: everyone else in the world might mostly be a part of an audience. The thing with the innovators is that they perform, they act, move, get stuff done. One of the things that I think is, when you're looking at development, one of the most important things to do, and when you're being entrepreneurial, is on certain days in certain situations, you kind of feel like we're a little bit not sure what to do. It's become a complex situation about how we keep going forward. But one key thing is, no matter what you do, just keep moving. You may not find the perfect next step. Don't worry about it. Just keep moving and keep learning and keep iterating in an agile way. Next framework: no matter what you're developing, you're always actually working in this context. It is one of my favorite contexts that I've used for so long. It's called the People, Process, Technology, Culture Framework. And what it is when you're doing development of anything, you are engaged in a process. The process is the key for how you're moving and you're creating a service or a product that has value. With that process, you're always using technology as an enabler to facilitate it. So even if you're not building like an online solution, you're still using all kinds of technologies that are your enablers. You want to be focused on what are the key technologies for how we drive ourselves. With yourselves and the people you start to get involved with the organization, you are basically using them to drive your processes enabled by your technology. And when you're making all the components work in a complete business model, you're thinking according to this mindset. If you do all of this very well and you're highly skilled and you don't address one other thing, I believe most often you will not succeed. And that is, the most important thing of all is the culture that you develop around an enterprise. So I'm going to keep moving. Next insight: if you're developing something and you start to feel overwhelmed, usually that means you should be excited because something's working. So when you're working that kind of those circles and all those things that are around the circles, you typically are going to get to these points where you feel overwhelmed. When you're feeling overwhelmed, then you should feel very happy and excited, because there's a good chance that that's an indication that you're actually making solid progress. Next framework, triple constraint bounding. Maybe you've seen this as you've gone through some of the training. It's something that you use every single time you develop anything. So for example, when I was developing this presentation over the past few days, I was subject to triple constraint bounding. If you're a student in school and you're getting ready for a test, you're subject to triple constraint bounding. And what it says is that if you're trying to develop something and you're targeting an outcome quality, so you've said, this is what I'm going to get to, this is going to be the outcome quality that I'm targeting. You have basically three types of levers that you can work with. If you are saying, okay, I'm not going to quite get to the outcome quality I've targeted, one possibility is you can stretch your time. I'm not a huge fan of stretching time. I think what happens when you stretch time is you lose focus. I'm a big fan of time boxing. You can actually say that you're going to not lower your quality, but maybe reduce the scope of what you're initially developing. So you can get to the quality, but not be quite as much of what you're trying to get into initially. So you can alter your scope, or you could do something with your resources. You can bring more people in, or if you have money, you can use the money to buy like contractors that do things for you. But every time you develop something, you always want to think in terms of triple constraint bounding. The next insight, in my opinion, innovators are outstanding entertainers of ideas. I've already told you that I'm a huge believer that it's extremely important to be creative. So people interact with ideas in different ways. Some have little time for them. I struggle to understand people that have little time for ideas. Some hang with them perpetually. Innovators are on the latter end of this spectrum. So when an idea comes around, they know how to entertain it. They bring it in, they offer it some coffee or tea and maybe some biscuits. They make it feel comfortable and welcome and ask what it has on its mind. If it's a clever idea and it's pertinent, they ask it to stick around for an incorporation into whatever it is they're creating. But you're always looking for ideas, and you're always looking for, are they relevant? If you're just crazy for ideas, then you're not so much of a commercial innovator. You're just crazy for ideas. Commercial innovators are looking at ideas and saying, how does that idea help me? How does it advance me? Another framework, whenever you're going through development, you're always working with effectiveness and efficiency. It's like yin and yang. Effectiveness gets you back to this notion of quality. Efficiency has to do with things like cycle time. In most cases, with whatever you're doing, including developing like a new business, your goal is to shorten the cycle time as much as you can while getting to the quality that you're targeting. You need enough quality that you're targeting so that you can get to the point that you're commercial. You don't want to do so much quality that you're taking so long that you run out of energy and you run out of resources. So you're always working, when you're developing something, you're always working with effectiveness and efficiency. They have this really complex interplay between them. Once you have something created and you have some type of solution, no matter what it is, you're still needing to look at effectiveness and efficiency. And very commonly, when you got your quality working, say you have an actual product that you're delivering, one of your goals with that product is to get the cycle time on its delivery and the cost on its delivery as low as possible. So another insight, if you feel like you're alone, you're probably not teaming up, consulting, leveraging, or networking enough. Next framework, the smiling curve. Those who've met me before know that this is one of my favorite frameworks. It actually relates to the stay on one station mistake. This is a little more complex. I'll go through it quickly. We can come back to it during the discussion. But if you look at these axes, think of this one as value creation. Think of this one as value chain. So the vertical is value creation. The horizontal is value chain. So going across the value chain, you tend to think of like product and service development and innovation excellence. Then you have fulfillment of some form, and you have kind of operational excellence. And then you have customer experience and relationship excellence. When you look at most things that create higher profits for you, they're going to be connected to the left and the right sides of the smiling curve. High operational excellence tends to be low margin. You can make a lot of money there. You need very, very, very high volume. The thing that I see, and I've seen over the course of my whole career, is that development efforts get trapped on the left side of the smiling curve. And it tends to be that like you're very technical, you're very good at working with software and databases and things, for example, you know how to build them. But you're not so good at getting into customer spaces, selling, branding, marketing. If you are only working the left side of the smiling curve, I believe in most circumstances, your chance of success is quite low. You must work the right side of the smiling curve. And it's connected to that stay on one station mistake. And it's also connected to this idea that you have to be working a complete business model as you're going through development. Next insight. I'm crazy for this one. You should always plan your work, and then you should then only then work your plan, but it's iterative because you're doing agile design. Next framework, the value triangle. And so we're into another way of making sure you're thinking about how you have a complete business model. I was thinking in the presentation of bringing in an example of how you do a forecast of like your operational activities, selling products, selling service or whatever, and then converting that into your financial forecast. I have this thing that's kind of programmed into me, which is when you're doing development, you start with numbers, you work with numbers, you stay with the numbers, you never stop using numbers. And what it does is it makes sure that you are ensuring that you're going to be commercial when you get to the point where you're launching your service and so on. And once you start to grow into those other circles, it makes sure that you're going to do the growth in a proper way. The idea with the value triangle is that the key is you have to get your revenues to start to grow. As your revenues grow and you're trying to bootstrap, the biggest problem you tend to have is liquidity. You tend to be getting into cash flow difficulties. So you must address liquidity, which is different from profitability and a return on the investment that you've made. And when you get these three elements working, and you look at really successful companies, so if you look at Microsoft, Google, Apple, they can do the value triangle like there is no tomorrow, and they can drive expansion. And so what happens is the value of the enterprise just goes, that circle just expands out and expands out and expands out. So if you're trying to develop something and you want to sell it in a few years, maybe that's your goal. You want to be working the value triangle. And when you do it correctly, you get that expansion. When you don't do it correctly, everything collapses in and you basically go out of business. Another innovator insight, this refers to Star Wars, and it refers to being different. So Master Yoda knows perfectly well how to conjugate the verbs in an English sentence to achieve subject agreement. He's Master Yoda, after all. Master Yoda intentionally formulates his sentences differently because he knows that different done cleverly stands out. So Yoda master this, powerful more you become. It's this thing again of be different. If you think of finding clever ways to be different in a market space, it's so incredibly important, and it always connects to your strategy. Another framework, and we're getting close to being through the presentation. The triangle and the circle that matter most. So when you're doing development, and this is something that when I look at, so I really like big challenges. I like things that scale and grow and have really fantastic revenue and profit profiles. But when you're looking at people and you look at the things they're trying to do, my point of view is you you have to always think of what's going to make me satisfied and happy. So when you're trying to develop an enterprise, if what's going to make you satisfied and happy is 3 or 4 years from now, you're going to have a small company. It's going to be based in Riga. It's going to cover all those things nicely on the value triangle, but you don't want to be anything more than that in, say, 3 or 4 years from now. That's what you should do, because it's this thing about addressing what your needs are for yourself. The thing that I feel strongly about, thinking about and always staying in balance with the connection you have with your family and your friends. And then also in the work situation, that kind of connection and balance you have with your work and with your colleagues. So, you know, to me, success is basically you feel happy in what you do. And so when you look at all these other things I've talked about, I believe that this is probably the most important framework of all. If this framework's not working for you, you should change something. If it's working for you really well, then all those other things we've talked about, drive those things. Another thing connected to this idea that I'm a big believer in is the nice thing is when you're working as an entrepreneur and as like the developing of something for yourself, you get to carry your own leash. When you go work in a big company and they plug you in somewhere, you're part of a department and they give you all these things you have to do every day. You have a boss that's instructing you. You're much more bounded. When you're working in this space and when you're in a leadership position advancing something, you get to carry your own leash. And that's, to me, maybe the best part of it all. Next, innovator insight. And so now I'm going to play with you a little bit. There's no such thing as finished. And that's going to take us to, we're going to finish with our finish. So I'm going to go back to the online platform that I'm working with. So for the 3331040, just so that you guys are aware, we're moving into our architecture work package. We're going to run it from April through May into early June. The schedules change a little bit from what you see on the schedule on the screen here, but we're actually in the process of recruiting people to come into what we're calling our creators group and to join in this work effort in terms of doing really consequent development of a more kind of complex solution. The platform that I'm talking about, it's a fantastic learning and training exercise. And we're looking for people that are interested to do that. We're going to have, the structure is going to be that we're going to work in person every Saturday full day. And then during the week, we'll have an online environment that we're working with. So the physical space that we think we're going to be using, I'm pretty sure we're going to be able to use, is actually the Workland environment that's there in Riga Old Town. And it's a fantastic workspace, a really nice work environment. And so the people who are operating Workland, they seem to have said that they'll support us in running the development through those months. We're also going to have an online space. We have a sub team that's doing the investigation of how we're going to address that so that we can build our work products and such together. And it takes us back to what we're seeking, which is we're seeking smart, ambitious, risk-taking people. So that's just telling you about the next thing that we're trying to drive, and that we are looking for people that will join us on it. We have a detailed schedule of the different types of skills we're looking for, and we're trying to get, our target is to get 30 key people. Right now we have about nine already lined up, so we have about 21 left to go. And I think we're going to have no problem during the month of March to get the other 21 people. And that's the end of my presentation. So now we can do the more enjoyable part where I can stop talking so much, and we can see who has questions or comments, and kind of have a more fun kind of dialogue. So guys, what do you think? Any comments, questions?